Lena had stopped writing during the Coldwater Jane story, somewhere around the point where Elias described the woman turning toward the man on the bank. She hadn't noticed herself stopping. She noticed now, looking down at her notebook, that the last line she'd written was, "She was facing me," and that the pen had made a small mark after it where her hand had simply ceased moving. She wrote the date and the time at the top of a fresh page. Journalists have it, anchor yourself to the verifiable before you go any further into the unverifiable. "You submitted these reports," she said, "the anomalous sightings file. That's in the district office right now." "It is," Elias said. "Could someone read it?" "Someone with access to district records, yes." He looked at her steadily. "You'd need to file a Freedom of Information request. It's a government document." Lena wrote this down. Sam watched her write it down with the expression of someone who found the journalistic reflex both reassuring and slightly beside the point. "The map story," Greta said. She had her hands wrapped around a metal cup she'd produced from her pack, tea by the smell of it, something herbal and warm. She had the comfortable forward lean of someone who'd been waiting for the third story specifically. "I've heard something about a map." Elias looked at her with what might have been interest. "What have you heard?" "Just that there was one, found in a campsite years back, that it had things written on it." She paused. "I heard it from a ranger, not you, someone who'd retired before I started hiking this district seriously. He mentioned it once and wouldn't say more." "When was this?" 8, 9 years ago? He was old by then. He died the following winter." Elias nodded slowly. "That would be Cartwright," he said. "He was the one who found it." He was quiet for a moment. "He told me about it the year before he died. He'd been carrying it for 20 years by then." The fire shifted. Marcus finally looked away from the shelter opening, looked at Elias directly for the first time since the stories began. "Tell it," he said. "Tom Cartwright came to the district in 1978, 2 years after I did, and we worked together until his retirement in 2001. 23 years. He was a careful man, methodical, thorough, the kind of ranger who wrote his incident reports in complete sentences and kept his own copies of everything. If Tom told you something he'd observed, you could take it as observed. He didn't embellish, and he didn't speculate beyond what the evidence showed. And in 23 years, I never caught him wrong about a material fact. He found the map in the summer in 1981 at a campsite in the Lewis Fork Wilderness area, a backcountry site about 6 miles from where we're sitting, on the western slope of the main ridge. It was an abandoned campsite, which wasn't unusual. Hikers left things behind regularly, sometimes deliberately, gear that had gotten too heavy, food they didn't want to carry out, and sometimes accidentally. Tom was doing a routine site check, the kind we did every few weeks on the backcountry sites to assess condition and clear any left-behind materials. The site had been used recently. The fire ring had ash that hadn't been rained on yet. The flattened grass where tents had been was still recovering. 3 or 4 people, he estimated, based on the tent prints. They'd been gone for at least a day, maybe 2. Nothing unusual about the site, except for the map. It was a standard USGS topographic map of the Mount Rogers National Recreation Area, the kind you could buy at the Visitors Center for a few dollars, printed on the heavy paper that held up reasonably well to field conditions. This one had been used. The fold lines were worn, the edges softened, the surface showing the handling of a trip's worth of consultation. Someone had been navigating with it. What stopped Tom was the pencil notations. Hikers marked up their maps, trails completed, campsites noted, water sources circled. Tom had seen hundreds of annotated maps in 7 years of trail work. What he hadn't seen was a map annotated with things that hadn't happened yet. He told me he didn't understand what he was looking at immediately. He saw the pencil marks and assumed they were the standard notations and started reading them the way he read all hiker annotations, as a record of where someone had been and what they'd found. It took him a few minutes of reading to realize that the dates on some of the notations were in the future. Not far in the future, days, weeks,
but the map was from the summer in 1981, and some of the notations were dated August and September in 1981, which at the time of Tom's site check had not yet arrived. He told me he stood at the campsite for a long time trying to find the explanation that made the dates a mistake. Someone had written the wrong year, someone was using an unconventional dating system, someone had pre-annotated their planned route before the trip rather than during it. Each explanation worked for some of the notations and failed for others. The more he read, the more the explanations failed. The notations were specific. That was what made them hard to dismiss. Not vague predictions, specific observations, the kind that came from being in a place and seeing what was there. A note near the Hurricane Creek drainage said, "Pool access blocked by deadfall, new route needed, August 14. Tom checked the date. August 14 was 3 weeks away. He noted the location and went back on August 15 and found the deadfall, a large hemlock that had come down across the access path in a storm that had passed through on the night of August 13. A notation near the Elk Garden trailhead said, "Vehicle broken down, north parking area, plates from Tennessee, September 2. September 2 was 6 weeks away. Tom checked. On September 2, a family from Tennessee had a radiator failure in the Elk Garden North lot and required assistance. A notation in the Lewis Fork area itself, near a specific trail junction, said, "Watch this crossing in rain, undermined, October." Tom flagged it with the trail crew. In October, after a 3-day rain, the crossing failed. The bank had been undermining for months, and the rain finished it. Nobody was hurt because the trail crew had put up warning signs. I want to be clear about what Tom told me and what he didn't tell me. He told me the notations he checked were accurate. He told me he checked approximately a dozen of them over the course of the summer and fall of 1981, the ones that were checkable, the ones that referred to specific verifiable events at specific locations on specific dates. He did not tell me he checked all of them. He told me there were notations he didn't check, notations he decided, after the first few confirmations, he didn't want to check. I asked him why. He was quiet for a long time. We were sitting in his truck at the end of a long day, parked at the Elk Garden trailhead, and the light was going down behind the ridge, and he was looking at it the way he looked at things he was thinking carefully about. He said, "Some of the notations weren't about trail conditions or broken down vehicles." I asked him what they were about. He said, "People."
He said one of the notations was near a backcountry campsite with a date in late August and a name he didn't recognize and words he wouldn't repeat to me directly, but that he described as, he used the word intimate. Personal information about a specific named person that no one who hadn't spent time with that person could have known. He said he looked up the name in the visitor permit records. The person had permitted for that campsite for that date. He said he never contacted the person. He never went to that site on that date to verify whether what the notation described was accurate. He said, "I decided I didn't want to know. That knowing would have required me to do something with the knowledge, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I still don't, and so I decided not to know." I understood this. I've made the same calculation myself with different information. I asked him about the handwriting. He said it was consistent throughout. One person, one hand, the same pencil pressure and letter formation on every notation, including the ones dated in the future. He said it didn't look like anything was added after the fact. He said the paper condition at the future dated notations was the same as at the past dated notations. The same level of handling, the same wear, the same exposure, as if the whole map, past and future alike, had been annotated at the same time. I asked him what he'd done with it. He said he'd kept it. He said he'd put it in a folder in his personal files and kept it through 23 years of retirement, and that it was in his desk at home in Galax when he told me this 8 years ago, and that he intended to have it destroyed when he died but hadn't yet gotten around to making the arrangement. I don't know if he made the arrangement. He died the following February, and whatever happened to his personal files after that happened without my involvement. But here's the thing I've thought about since he told me. The thing that keeps me from being able to put the map in the category of unexplained anomaly and leave it there. Tom said there were notations he didn't read closely, notations in sections of the map he folded away from and didn't look at again after the first examination. Notations he described when I pressed him as being in areas of the map that covered places he hadn't yet been, places outside his regular patrol area, outside the district he managed, territory he didn't know well. I asked him where. He unfolded the map in his memory, the way he described it. He looked at it enough times that he could reconstruct it. He said there were heavy annotations in the upper left quadrant, the highest elevations, the most exposed terrain. Whitetop Mountain. He said the Whitetop section of the map was the most heavily annotated section of all, dates spanning years, not weeks and months, but years, some of them far enough out that they'd seemed entirely abstract in 1981. He said the handwriting in that section was different from the rest of the map, still one hand, but different, more deliberate, as if the person who wrote it had slowed down for that section, had wanted to be precise. I asked him what the Whitetop notations said. He looked at the ridge for a long time. He said, "I didn't read them. I made a decision not to read them, and I kept to it." Then he started the truck, and we drove back to the station, and we never talked about the map again. He died in February. There was a storm that night. I thought about the map in his desk in Galax, and I thought about the Whitetop annotations, and I thought about what it meant to make a decision not to know something and whether that decision held after the person who'd made it was gone. I never went to Galax. The decision held. But I've been on Whitetop Mountain a great many times since 1981, in all weathers and all seasons, and there are nights up here, nights like this one, when the storm comes in and the mountain does what this mountain does. When I think about a heavily annotated upper left quadrant and deliberate handwriting, and a man who looked at it once and folded it away and kept it in a desk drawer for 20 years rather than read what it said. I think about what it might have said. I think about dates. I think about the fact that we're here tonight, the 6 of us, in this shelter, in this storm, and I wonder whether someone, somewhere, wrote this down already. The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the silences after the first 2 stories. Those had been the silence of people processing something unnerving. This was the silence of people sitting with an implication that had arrived in the room and made itself comfortable. Sam said, very quietly, "Are you saying someone might have known we'd be here tonight?" "I'm saying Tom Cartwright found a map in 1981 with notations in it that proved accurate," Elias said. "Everything beyond that is what I think about on nights like this, not what I know." Lena was writing again. She wrote for a moment and then stopped and looked up. "The handwriting," she said. "Tom said it was one hand throughout. One person annotated the whole map." "That's what he said." "Including the future sections?" "Including the future sections." "Did he have any sense of—" She stopped, started again. "The notations that were accurate, the deadfall, the broken-down car, the trail crossing, those were observations, specific, accurate, observed quality notations, not predictions, not guesses." She paused. "The person who wrote them like someone who had been there at those times, all of them." Elias looked at her with the expression he'd worn when Greta said she'd heard about the map, something between interest and recognition. "That's exactly what Tom said," he said. "They read like field notes, not forecasts, like someone who had walked those sections and seen those things and written down what they saw." He paused. He said the only explanation he could construct that accounted for all of it was one he wasn't willing to write in any report. "Which was," Priya said. Elias was quiet for a moment. "That whoever annotated that map had been in those places at those times, all of them, past and future alike, as if time for this particular person didn't run in the direction it runs for the rest of us." The fire burned. The wind held its note in the shelter gap. Outside, Whitetop Mountain continued to do what Whitetop Mountain was doing, which was receive the storm with the patient indifference of something that had been receiving storms for longer than anyone in the shelter could imagine. Greta set down her cup. 3 stories, she said. The creature in the hollow, the woman in the water, the map. She looked at Elias. The firelight moved across his face. "You've been paying attention," he said. "I've been in these mountains for 30 years, she said. "You learn to pay attention." "The next 3, he said, are different. The land is still here, it's always here, but the next 3 are about what people brought into it, what people do to mountains, and what mountains do back." He reached forward and fed the fire. 2 pieces, placed with the same precision as every piece before them, the fire receiving them and strengthening. The 4th story is about an old man at Elk Garden who carves figures from apple wood. Priya pulled her jacket tighter. She had, Elias noticed, stopped looking for explanations after the 3rd story. She was simply listening now. This was, in his experience, when the listening became the thing itself, rather than the means to something else.